Hello, everyone. Good evening. And welcome to Pre-Uni New College Term 3 Education webinar. I'm David at Pre-Uni New College head office. And it's my pleasure to be a moderator for this webinar. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for all your support throughout this term. It's nearly end of the term. So I hope you and your family are staying safe and healthy through these challenging times. So as a part of Term 3 college event, we've organized a series of education webinar. And especially this week, it is all about OC exam information for our year 3 parents who are concerned about next year's OC placement test. So tonight, as the first session of the webinar series, we will share about information about the new OC thinking skills test component. So as a presenter of tonight's webinar, I invited Ms. Nala An, who is working for year 3 and year 4 students for WNT and OC TTC courses. And Nala is also working for our R&D team, and she's developing a new OC and selected trial test questions, especially for the thinking skill component, and also lots of resources for parents. So she's very famous and very capable teacher, and I'm quite happy to work with her. So I'm quite happy to work with her. So yes, let's get started. Please welcome our presenter, Naila.
Okay, hello everyone. My apologies. I think I just experienced some technical difficulties, but I'd like to also thank David for introducing me. And so just before I start, I'd also like to welcome everyone as well. So hello and welcome, dear parents and caregivers. I would like to personally welcome each and every one of you in joining us in tonight's webinar in regards to the 2022 OC placement test, which is presented to you today by the Pre-Uni New College head office. So once again, if you have any questions or queries that you'd like to ask in regards to what is covered today, please type on the chat icon on the right-hand side, where there will be the Pre-Uni New College manager staff who will take note of your questions, and in future future FAQs or Q&A with the answers to your questions will be available for you to watch later. Or an alternative would be to further inquire in your local pre-uni branch. So once again, my name is Naila Ann and I'll be your presenter for today. Okay, so why don't we begin with what we're working through today. So our main focus for today's seminar is looking at the thinking skills component in the OC placement test. Now it says the following slide will be looking specifically at the contents of tonight's webinar. So we'll be looking at today what exactly is thinking skills, the role of the thinking skills test in the OC exam. We'll also be looking at what is the difference between thinking skills and GA, because this is definitely the biggest change in probably 20, 30 years since the OC exam was first introduced. We'll also be looking at the types of thinking skills questions, examples of such questions, and we'll also be looking at the general method of solving thinking skills questions, how to prepare for the test, so tips to prepare for this test, and how we as Pre-Uni New College cater to building your child's capacity in thinking skills. And finally, afterwards, a little time for you guys to work on or to ask some questions on the chat on the right-hand side, as said below. So before we move on, I'd just like to note one thing. Please note that although your child is the one who will be taking the test, it's also just as important for you as a parent or caregiver to know all relevant background information in regards to thinking skills in order to help best prepare your child with their OC examination. So let's begin with our first point. So we're going to be first looking at what exactly is thinking skills. Well, as its name indicates, thinking skills is based on one's thinking. And when we further break down each word, thinking can be defined as the flow of ideas. It can be also talked about as thoughts, while skills is defined as the ability to do something well, which becomes slowly an expertise. So now an average person, statistic, has up to 60,000 thoughts per day. However, this is not quite thinking skills. These thoughts may include if you decide between tea or coffee or what clothes to wear. These are probably the thoughts that we probably have, which account to our 60,000 thoughts. However, these decisions and thoughts that we come up with on a daily basis do not actually require much levels of effort. And so this everyday thinking or thoughts can be defined as surface level thoughts. But this is not thinking skills. And so this is where we need to understand and define the differences between thinking skills and normal surface level thoughts. So if thinking skills is not surface level thoughts, what exactly is it? Let's have a look. Well, thinking skills, or thinking as a skill, is beyond the everyday surface level thoughts, and it requires something called higher order thinking. And within higher order thinking, there are a variety of components and skills required to applying this. So these different skills and components include the following, and this is including critical thinking, creative thinking, problem solving, computational thinking, ethical reasoning, as well as metacognition. And so these components of thinking skills and these skills, they have been recognized both globally and also by the New South Wales Department of Education necessary for 21st century learning, which is an underlying reason for the shift in the OC Opportunity Class examination. And so these are some really important points. And if you actually have a look at the New South Wales Department of Education website, you'll find that these components and skills are all listed down below as an important part of higher order thinking. Okay, so let's look specifically at what exactly the thinking skills examination is. So the thinking skills assessment is an examination which tests the problem solving and critical thinking skills of students. So there's two main categories when you work on the thinking skills assessment. And this measures a student's ability in critical thinking and problem solving, which are essential and crucial for the 21st century. Now, I'm going to first talk to you about how this thinking skills assessment is not, although new to New South Wales, this is not a newly created test that's just been created probably last year. It has been, although it's been introduced to us in New South Wales from last year, this test has been around for quite some time. And so the thinking skills assessment has been an internationally utilized assessment used for many purposes, such as for university admissions, for medicine or law in universities, global universities and top universities in the world, such as Oxford University and Cambridge University. And in addition to that, components of thinking skills has been used in the SATs, which is in the United States, which is the HSC equivalent for Australia. And so, although new to New South Wales, it's quite a world-recognized, internationally recognized and used assessment. Now, New South Wales currently is recognizing the need for critical thinking and problem solving, which is why it has been implemented in a primary school and high school setting in order to prepare our students for the 21st century, such as currently now or in future as well, and compete on a global scale to our high potential learners and gifted learners, better known as opportunity class and selective. And so these are the main points as to what exactly the thinking skills assessment is and why we do it. So over onto the next slide, we'll also be looking further into our thinking skills assessment. So the thinking skills assessment is the ability to apply and access higher order thinking in the core of most intellectual activity. So if you think about it, all of this, our purpose for our students or our children having the best possible education is for them, in order for them to have a really great career and in 21st century jobs, we are really focused on innovations and as well as advancements of technology. And these things are quite important. What is needed to be innovative and be able to access technology and stuff, and elements of this is being able to access that higher order of thinking. And that's probably that's the reasons why. Now, OC, as you know, caters for the high potential, gifted and talented students, as reiterated before. And this has been recognized within the Department of Education, which is why OC and selective exist. Now, because of this, it has actually become a necessity to change the test to something more relevant, which is why there has been a shift from general ability to thinking skills. Now, looking at my last point, talking about the shift from general ability to thinking skills, in future slides, we'll be looking at how this shift and the differences between them, as well as the similarities, because per se, it's not a totally different, test or skills that we're looking at. However, there are some definite differences between the two. Okay, so on the next slide, we'll be looking at the role of the thinking skills test. So according to the 2018 review by the New South Wales Department of Education, so this in 2018, if I had to say this really simply, in 2018, there was a review conducted by the Department of Education where they were trying to see how more we can cater to our students. And one of these main things that was focused on was on our high potential learners, because that's something that's quite neglected upon within our education overall, even though we do have OC and selective. And so within there, they conducted a data research where they were looking at 10 years worth of data. So probably from 2009 to 2018, and they found out quite a few results, interesting results within there. And one thing that they did find out that really stood out the most, which is probably why we've changed from GA to thinking skills, is that GA, they found out that GA did not really show the true abilities of students, as there were gender gaps as well as more students being able to, or less students being able to access the test as well. And so one of the many things that they found was that there was a higher weighting in math components compared to English components in general ability, which was seen as or deemed as unfair. And so as you can see down below in our little diagram here, we can see that general ability weighs more heavily onto mathematics than English, which is why there was a result finding that there was this contributed to the gender gap within test scores. And so this was one of the leading reasons why the thinking skills assessment was implemented. So that was the role and the shift, the reasoning, underlying reasoning behind the shift from the GA general ability exam to the thinking skills test that we have today. So now we're going to be looking at the differences between thinking skills and general ability. And so as you can see here, we've got two distinct parts. We've got general ability here, which the general ability test assesses on a student's reasoning skills in various components such as verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning, and abstract reasoning. And so this involves the use of various looking at patterns, being able to spot relationships between definitions or between numbers and so forth. And however, because you're only looking at visual or sometimes mostly visual relationships between two different ideas, this can be seen as something a bit more surface level thinking. And so to cater or to tackle that, there's been a shift to thinking skills, where thinking skills tests focus on assessing two main skill sets, and these involve the problem-solving skills as well as the critical thinking skills. Now, problem-solving involves numerical skills, while critical thinking involves analyzing and reasoning. Now, I think the main difference that you just need to gain from this is that general ability is more surface level thinking, while thinking requires the higher order thinking that is related. Okay, so that's the main difference between thinking skills and general ability. Now, although there are some differences, there's one thing that we need to understand, and that is that thinking skills and general ability, although they have differences, they are still similar in the sense that both tests are aptitude type tests, and they rely on students' underlying mental capacities rather than a student's learned skills and knowledge. So if we think about it, mathematics and English, we've known to test this based on students' learned skills and knowledge over the past years. However, thinking skills and general ability, they're more based on looking further into a student's abilities to understand a variety of concepts and apply them into various types of questions. So that is a quick difference between thinking skills and general ability in terms of definitions and what we see. Now, if we have a look further, we're going to be looking at the difference between, so in this slide, we'll be observing the similarities and differences between these two thinking skills and general ability questions. So they are actually still within the same components category, where they are questions involving the use of graphs. However, you'll be able to see the differences on how thinking skills require more higher order thinking rather than general ability, which is more surface level. So if I quickly read out to you on the left-hand side, the thinking skills question, we're looking at a breakdown of how Steve spends his Saturdays. Now, if he always sleeps 10 hours a day, so you can see in the graph, how much longer does he spend studying than exercising on this day? And so you can see a breakdown of the day here. Now, within here, you can see that not all information has been revealed within here. So this is where there is a necessity to problem solve and use various understandings of numerical concepts, such as fractions. You can see your understanding of angles within here, as well as percentages, to be able to work out how to solve these questions. Now, on the right-hand side is still using graphs, but in a different sense. So we can see here, it says in the Venn diagram, each square equals 4 plants in a certain area. The plants can be toxic or beneficial, green or white, and have flowers or no flowers, and can be big or small. How many green plants have no flowers or are big? So you can see there's a difference between the two. Some similarities include how both requires the analysis of data involved in these graphs, the need to understand the data represented, and the question to determine what procedure will be taken to answer the question. Now, the differences, as said before, is that thinking skills requires a graph analysis, arithmetic operations, and making deductions, while the general ability is much broader and doesn't necessarily require mathematical operations, you're more likely to use visual analysis to solve this question. So that's a little brief understanding of how we work out questions like this. If we move forward, we'll be looking at another question. And you'll see that this one is more based on critical thinking. So although both require logic, having a look at our thinking skills, we'll be looking, you can see that it requires the use of identifying the main conclusion, while general ability revolves around using logic. Yes, we are looking at logic in both. However, thinking skills requires us to take that extra level and take this further in being able to recognize those main ideas within. And so just being able to see the differences between problem-solving questions seen on our previous slide and critical thinking questions seen on this slide here. So moving on to our next part, I'm going to just show you the types of thinking skills questions. So having a look here in our thinking skills questions, there are two main components that they'll be testing on. We'll be looking at problem solving as well as critical thinking. Now, within thinking skills, there are actually other subcategories that you can see within problem solving, and that involves finding procedures as well as many other subcategories, identifying similarities, as well as relevant selections. And so you can see all these different subcomponents within these different categories as well. So there's actually quite a broad amount of questions that we'd have to be familiar with and really work through. So once again, so that was the types of problem-solving questions. We're now looking at the types of critical thinking questions. As you can see here, these are the different main categories, and within here, there's even other different types of questions within each subcategory. Okay, so when we're having a look here, we can see that although there are a variety of thinking skills questions as covered in the previous slides, which could require a number of different ways to approach and solve questions, we have developed a general method that students can follow when solving relevant thinking skills questions. And so these are the general steps. And these steps have been developed by Pre-Uni College and also aligns itself with other works of research when you look up how to solve critical thinking questions, and such as TED Ed and others. So as you can see here, this is probably the basic general method that students can follow if they are unfamiliar with the variety of topics that thinking skills questions cover. So step 1, reading the question. Step 2, reading the argument. Step 3, paraphrasing the argument using your own words. Step 4, predicting the answers. And step 5, eliminating wrong answers and finding the best answer. So as you can see here, down below, we've just put in a link that works through in a bit more detail how you'd solve these thinking skills questions using this approach. And they give you examples as well, and they show you how you can apply these steps into different types of thinking skills questions in addition to that. So if you have the time to, feel free to refer to this to be able to further inform yourself with how to solve thinking skills questions. Okay, so I'm going to move on to some examples. So once again, if you just have a look at the question, we won't go through this in terms of solving, but I'll show you what kind of question this is. As you can see here, there is a bit of an information of this question to be able to solve this question. And the question says, how many performances of the show will there be? As you can see, there's some dates included, and they've presented to you a scenario or a situation. Now, this question is an example of finding procedures number concepts within the number concept subcategory. So within problem solving, this is one strand within the thinking skills questions, and it involves looking at understanding and analyzing the information given in the form of a table, using that information to answer the question. And so a lot of the times within problem solving, you can see that higher order of thinking is needed, because not only are we not presented with a table for us to just solve, for students to solve, they need to take that extra step in being able to create that table in order to be able to solve this question. And so that involves the extra higher order of thinking. Okay, so over onto the next question. This is an example of a critical thinking question within thinking skills, and it is within the detect reasoning errors, identifying arguments subcategory. As you can see here, you can see that there are statements given by, or logic reasonings given by 2 characters, and you've also been given a scenario, and students have to be able to determine whose reasoning or whose idea is relevant, is correct, or whose arguments are flawed or not. So students are presented with flawed arguments, and a thorough analysis is required by students to determine the flaw. And so several plausible flaws are presented as answer options, which each requires careful consideration in order to determine the correct answer. So as you can see, boys and this is an example of a type of question, and we being able to utilize the steps and the general method to be able to work through, to be able to answer this question is quite important. And so understanding what exactly the question is asking for is one of the most important components within thinking skills that students need to understand. Okay, so now we'll be moving on to how to prepare for the thinking skills test. Now, contrary to what a lot of people have been saying, where you can't study for the thinking skills test, this is quite highly incorrect. Now, the reason being is because there's many methods in being able to understand how exactly being able to be familiar and understanding the thinking skills is already half the journey, half the battle when being able to answer these or being able to work through this test. And so these are some tips that have been gathered that really will help prepare for the thinking skills exam. And so I'll be going through each component and explaining to you guys why. So the first one is being familiar with the test process. If you walk into somewhere where it has been shown that students who have been able to, so it's been shown that students who have been able to, who have had that extra practice, that continued practice of thinking, of working through the thinking skills test or any test in test conditions, they're more familiar with the test process, showing that they're more comfortable when working in a high intensity environment. And so on the right hand side, as you can see here, this was actually collected from the review that the Department of Education has found. And so they found that students have said that coaching works and is necessarily to do well because it gives them that extra practice and familiarity that students actually need. In addition, another fact is to be able to prepare well for the thinking skills test is to be able to utilize all available information and resources. So being able to access information given by the Department of Education, given by the thinking skills providers, which is Cambridge Assessment. So being familiar with that, as well as what Pre-Uni New College provides as well, with their many resources such as Cyber School and other and books that are provided, as well as their courses, is quite important, and utilizing that to the best, foremost is one of the greatest strengths that you can probably undertake as well. The third step is understanding the question types, purposes, and methods of solving such questions. Being familiar with, as we've covered before, those question types as well as the purposes of these questions is quite important, as that's your ultimate goal. In each question, you need to be able to understand what exactly that question's asking you in order to get that answer, in order to be able to get that mark when you're working through this question. The next thing is, and this is probably a long-term goal, is to track the progress of your child's strengths and weaknesses. You'll notice that because there's so many different subcategories and substrands within thinking skills, you'll probably notice your strengths, your child's strengths in certain areas of thinking skills compared to other subcategories. For example, maybe your child is more stronger with the critical thinking aspect compared to the problem solving. And so from there, you can think of how you can be able to create will be able to focus on then working on their problem solving skills, such as maybe getting them more familiar with their numerical concepts, or being able to get them more familiar with being able to break down that question to be able to work your way through this question. And so tracking that progress of your strengths, child's strengths and weaknesses is quite important. The next part is setting a time frame. So not only setting a long-term plan on what your child needs to work on, but just being able to get your child to work in test conditions in continuously gets them more familiar with that test process. So that actually falls into that category of the first point. Being familiar with the test process also gets you to be a bit more familiar with the time frame. So in terms of that, the test component, thinking skills component is 30 questions in 30 minutes. So that you'd probably per se give around 40 seconds to 1 minute to answer each question, which is not a lot of time. So being able to get that practice, it really helps to get your child to achieve the best possible. And finally, reviewing questions through available resources is one of the most important points as well. Reviewing questions and the idea of review is just as important as attempting and practicing questions. We can do as many questions as students can complete as many questions as they like and think that it is effective. However, it only becomes even more effective when students are able to review those questions through available resources, such as when they participate in OC trial test, or when they are in the thinking skills section of their lessons in WNT classes. They are able to review those questions with their teachers and understand the logic between through there. And in addition to that, the cyber school resources in terms of review is quite important as well. And finally, asking questions. What we can see is what I've noticed as a teacher myself, I can see that students who continue to ask questions, who continue to challenge their thinking and continue to ask where their misunderstandings are those students who continue to improve. And so it's quite important that they are continuing to ask questions to be able to correct their thinking and their thoughts, because thinking skills is quite a challenging topic or area, and therefore asking those questions are quite an important process when working through when being able to prepare for the thinking skills test. And so down below in the next few slides, I'm going to present to you how Pre-Uni New College, what resources Pre-Uni New College has in place for your child in order for them to prepare best for the thinking skills test component for the OC test. And so the first thing is the WNT course. So you'll have noticed for parents from year 3 to year 6 that in lieu of general ability, so in replacement of general ability, a new thinking skills modules has been implemented to further equip your child in building their understanding of thinking skills in the OC and selective high school placement tests. And so the way that this has actually been structured is that every week they'll go through a certain topic within thinking skills and a bit of practice on mathematical reasoning, which reflects the maths topic focus of that week. And a few questions, test style questions, will be provided within this module. And so students will be working through that, and they'll also be covered thoroughly by the teacher in review before they can go online to practice even more questions. And so these are some that's one way of how we are further equipping your students in building and understanding and thinking skills. And so that's one method. Another way that we, on the next slide, you can see here, this is a lesson schedule of our thinking skills. So as you can see here, we begin with year 3 students having a look at the following topics. Then it then it continues through to year 4, all the way up to year 6. And you can see that the different levels are presented as well. So you can see here in year 3, they start off with thinking skills at a level 2, following on to Year 4 at the Level 2, where it then progresses from Year 4, Term 3, Level 3, in preparation for a higher level of thinking skills for the selective test. And so you can see that they are continuously prepared up until Year 6 and so forth. The next thing that we have in place is a cyber school online resources. So you'll notice that there are free critical thinking strategies videos for students to be able to access for that extra practice and familiarity of thinking skills. But not only that, there are also worked solutions and videos of review questions that students can access on cyber school to be able to answer for that extra practice as well. And not only that, there are also questions that students can answer based on their thinking skills, and mathematical reasoning related to the WNT course as well. So those are some online resources as long as you have it and as long as you have internet. Okay. One thing that we've got as well, and this is a specialized course within Pre-Uni New College, which is the OC Foundation course, as well as the Year 4 OC trial test course. And so this provides the opportunity to become accustomed and exposed to the many types of thinking skills questions. Now, not only that, there are also, this is quite important in them being able to work in test conditions, but also being able to access that valuable teacher knowledge in reviewing these questions as well. So that is another resource that is available for students to work through. Okay. We also have recently published a new Essential Logic for Thinking Skills resource book that is designed to simulate common thinking skills questions based on essential propositions, logic, and help students to understand how to solve thinking skills questions from these logics. So a lot of these within this book, you'll be given the most basic or essential logic reasonings presented, as well as a variety of practice questions that relate to that. And so that is that extra, and that book is available for you to purchase for you to purchase for your child for that extra preparation within at home. And seeing that current circumstances where we're all at home we can see that this is probably a great opportunity to be able to work through this book as well. And so if you are interested in this book, they should be available at your local branch or for order as well. Okay, so that is basically all that has been all that is being covered in today's webinar. And so hopefully this covered a lot of your questions that you have within this webinar. And once again, if you do have any other questions to ask, feel free to write down in the chat on the chat on the right hand side any questions that you may further have. And thank you very much for listening in to today's webinar, and I hope that you all have a great evening.
Thank you, Naila. Thank you very much. Yeah, and also thank you very much for everyone for your participation and tonight's webinar. Yeah, we have heaps of questions from our parents. Not sure if we can answer all of these questions tonight. Okay, let's do this way. All your questions will be stored in our system so that we can track all the question, and we will summarize all the question and answer on our cyber school website. And also, this webinar has been recorded, so for the next 48 hours, it will be available to play again from the same webinar link. Yeah, after this webinar. Yeah, if you missed any part of the presentation, yeah, you can watch it again. And some parents ask whether they can get a copy of the presentation slide. Early next week, it will be available at the Cyber School news section. Yes. And there are a lot of questions about OC application and outcome procedure. So we have another seminar tomorrow night for the overview of all the OC placement process and application procedure. And then, yeah, it will be from 7 p.m. tomorrow, so you can get more idea about what is the key dates for the next year's OC placement exam. And then on Friday, yeah, we have the last webinar, which is all about reading test component. So please come again, and then I hope everyone enjoy the program during this week. So thank you very much. Yeah. So have a great evening, and see you tomorrow night. Thank you.